Hello, thank you very much for coming. It's a very nice day in Nice, and I'm very happy and honored that you are here. First of all, Rachel Guyet, do I say it right?
Yes, perfectly. Thank you for the invitation.
Very happy you're here. You're the Doctor of Political Science and Sociology. Please correct me if I have to add anything to...
You made some research, indeed.
I made some research, yeah. Thank you for coming. I'm very happy that you would like to discuss something about energy poverty, and Franceco, Ginevra and Mariam, students of the master track of energy transition and global governance, will also join us today. Thank you very much.
And thank you for our host, Pjotr, today. He's going to lead the interview. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's get started. Franceco, would you like to tell us what energy poverty means to you?
Yes, thank you, Pjotr. So when we talk about energy poverty, we have to distinguish between what's energy poverty in developed countries, where the main problem is often the possibility for the citizen to pay the bill, while in a developing country, the problem is more focused on the access to electricity in the first place. We saw from the last report of 2012, 2020, that the number of people affected by energy poverty around the world is 730 million. This is a number that is declining since 10 years before, but is still very high. And we have a major problem since the investment that are made are declining. From 2010 to 2019, so pre-pandemic, the investment were already declining. And after the pandemic, this declining is even deeper and steeper because government were more focused on their internal business more than investing in other countries. And this is something like energy poverty is really concerning. And we can take, for example, Rwanda. Rwanda, after the genocide, had really a miracle, economic miracle going on. Since the 2000s, the early 2000s, the economic of Rwanda was really increasing, and the GDP gained 7 points per each year, 7% each year, and this is something that is incredible for an African country. But was also there was this economic surge and also investment made by the state. For example, they paid for 600,000 laptops all over the country for the student to gain IT skill. And they were collaborating also with the US, for example, in private, with the delivery of blood and medicine, 4,000 delivery made by drones. And with the government. Inside the project Power Africa, there was a massive investment in hydroelectric and to connect 200,000 and more people to the electric grid and to have access to electricity off grid. But despite that, we have to remember that we have also a problem with democracy in Rwanda. For example, in the Economist Index, the Democratic Index, Rwanda is has a very low score and is ranked as the 127th country. And this can be is cons. And in terms of energy poverty, we can see that the electrification rate of Rwanda is increasing thanks to economic growth, but the average percentage of electrification rate is about 46% for the WTO, and the government is claiming for the urban areas 76%. So even in urban areas, we don't have a perfect electrification rate. This is like something that is really concerning and should make all the governments of the world think about it, because if a developing country wants to reach a high level of electrification, it needs to invest since now. You have to start now to solve the problem. And I would also like to ask to Dr. Guyet her opinion about this electrification rate, because should we should be taking consideration the reliability of this electrification, or they are really, they are like very stable, and we can take it seriously.
Thank you very much, Franceco, for this big picture regarding energy poverty also in developing countries, because as European, we often focus on energy poverty in Europe. But you're absolutely right. This electrification rate is always a tricky question. What does that mean concretely? Does that mean that the grid is built, but are we sure that the households can connect to the grid? And there is usually a gap in the policies where governments don't invest into this connecting point. So it means you have the grid, you are considered electrified, but you still can't consume because you don't have the money to invest into this connection. So this is the first limit of the electrification rate, depending on the methodology, how it's calculated, but we have to look at that. The other question, and you're absolutely right, I would agree with you that the question of reliability should be integrated, because you may be connected, but if the grid goes on and off regularly, then it creates issues, and it creates issues also to connected people. So it means electrification rate doesn't give a main picture of the reality of the lived experience of what energy poverty could mean. And it means in your example, the great example of Rwanda, that probably also the middle class households being connected because of the unreliability of the grid may face energy poverty issue. So thank you very much for this important question.
That's very interesting, the lived experience of the energy poverty. I would like to ask Mariam, my colleague as well, about energy poverty in Europe. Would you like to make a few remarks?
Well, energy poverty is a very big topic in Europe, but it has a different meaning. In Europe, energy poverty means the lack of access to adequate energy services to meet the daily needs of the home, both in winter and in summer. When we're talking about the energy poverty in Europe, we mainly refer to the home, but it's also highly involved the ability of people to access and afford mobility. But if we focus on energy poverty at home, we can say that it's usually caused by three factors. First thing is low income, and then high energy prices, and then low energy efficiency. So we should not forget that energy poverty is a daily lived experience that affects all members of the family, when the family struggles every month to pay the bills, or heat part of the home, or cannot cool their home in the summer, or cannot heat their home at an adequate level in the winter. So very often these people are forced to choose between the expenses, and this is known as the heat or the eat dilemma, and it's a very common thing as we see today in Europe. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Rachel, would you like to add something to this?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mariam, to conclude on the heat or eat dilemma, because actually this problem is increasing now with the crisis, but I guess we're going to talk about this. And it's true that what makes the understanding of energy poverty complex is this combination of different factors causing energy poverty, and you were right to say that the most common ones are low income, energy price, and bad quality of housing. But we also know that there are other factors involved, so like climate policies, like housing market policies, like, social policy, wage policy, all this has an impact. So the problem of energy poverty is the fact that you are right, a lived experience, a daily lived experience, and an awful one, but it's also a global problem that is really hard to address by policies.
Mm-hmm. Ginevra, would you like to add something? Poverty.
Yeah, I would like to add that energy poverty in Europe is not a new topic, and it was first defined in the UK back in 1991, and then integrated in legislation in around 2000. And now in Europe, France followed into 2010, recognizing energy poverty in legislation. But most of European countries nowadays still don't recognize it, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in Europe. There is a need to identify some indicators for energy poverty in Europe. There are existing ones, for example, from the EU Energy Poverty Observatory, and they have 4 main ones. They are based first on bill arrears. second and third on a too high or too low percentage of income spent on energy by people. And the third one is, I think, the feeling of cold in houses. And according to these indicators, the EU Energy Poverty Observatory discovered that around 30 to 80 million people in Europe suffer from energy poverty. So I would say it's still a high number in Europe, even if people usually don't talk about it much. And probably this problem is gonna get worse with the current energy crisis.
Francesco, would you like to add something to this, or?
I totally agree with Ginevra. The concept of energy poverty in Europe is something that we are starting to have real project at European level also. We just finished in 2020 a organic plan to tackle the problem, and now we see, as Ginevra said, there is the observatory that is working on it. I know that some moves are also being implemented in the 54-55, and so I think that the Europe is moving in the right way. Yet this is a difficult time, of course, with the Russian-Ukrainian conflict, especially just after the pandemic finished to hit the continent so hard. It's interesting to see what the legislator and what the public will do to tackle this problem.
You're absolutely right. It's interesting to see how quickly the European Commission reacted to the unprecedented situation we are facing with this crisis in Ukraine, and how quickly, already in October 2021, the European Commission published this toolbox trying to frame what kind of reactions the national governments should implement to try to mitigate the impact of this crisis. So yes, you are absolutely right, and it seems that in many countries now, national level but also cities are also involved in trying to find solutions to support energy poor people. And it's actually very interesting, because based on what you said, we always have the feeling that people with low income only are concerned. But what we see now with the current crisis is that also middle-class people are concerned by the problem. And I read some interesting studies in Germany and in the Netherlands. In Germany, if I remember well, 40% of the lower middle-class people might be affected by energy poverty, so in Germany. And in the Netherlands, which is your country, Pjotr, they said that 600,000 households are now facing financial difficulties to afford utility bills, which is something quite unknown in the Netherlands. So it means that this energy poverty issue is not only for low-income people, but with the current crisis, it's also affecting other people. But okay, if you ask me now, okay, but low-income people must be more affected, you would be right, because we see again another study in Germany, not Germany, OECD, I think, said that lower-income people would pay 20% more for their energy than affluent people. So there is the inequalities that were existing before, as you said, Mariam, are now increasing. So it means your figure will probably, unfortunately, dramatically increase because of the current crisis. So yes, we are in deep problems. I mean, as a citizen, but also as policymakers.
I also like to add, I totally agree with what Dr. Guyet said, and I would like to add that me and Ginevra, firsthand, we are Italians, and there's been the general election just 1 month ago, and we saw it was like a really important topic. It was put in the framework of energy security per se, but the public and the general public was talking so much about it in the aspect of energy poverty, with the crisis on businesses, small industries, and all these part of the GDP, Italian GDP, that was shutting down or freeze because of the problem of having too high bills and having a surge in the problem with having the energy coming to their factory, coming to their businesses.
Would you say this is something new, or is the research now intensifying on energy poverty?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to react to what Franceco said, because this is exactly the point of the current crisis. It doesn't not only affect how low-income household more, but not only, because now we talk about hospitals, we talk about swimming pools, we talk about services, public services, private companies that are also affected by the price increase. And it's a first. I mean, so far, energy poverty was a topic that was more or less tackled in Europe. I mean, as Ginevra, you said, only a few countries have a definition of energy poverty. So it means only a few countries put this topic on top of their agenda. But now the affordability issue gains traction and is the top priority both of the European Commission but of most national governments. And yeah, you mentioned the Italian election and how the government were going to react. I mean, doing a mapping of the mitigation measures implemented by European governments, we see that all governments in Europe have decided on implementing something to support the citizens, but increasingly also SMEs and public services. And so it's really something totally new, to answer your question, Pjotr, that has not been seen before.
No. There's a lot of support, but still nobody calls it energy poverty.
This is another very good point. Now everyone calls it affordability. But you're right. Raising awareness on energy poverty is still something that should be done, because we are really deep into this problem. But now everyone is talking about both security, as you said, affordability. Who is talking about climate?
It's kind of left behind now.
Yeah. And when you check the mitigation measures implemented by the governments, for example, you see that they try to support people and companies and public services more and more. When they support people, usually they support them in a universal way. So whether you have a normal income or a low income, you receive the same amount of money. Is it just? Is it socially just? If you are affluent enough, you may consider paying your bill without the support of the government. But the money you receive as low income to pay for your bill doesn't make up for the increase of the bill. So it means everyone is receiving the same amount of money, but with different levels of consumption, different levels of income, and it doesn't compensate. So this is a real question. Then the second question we can ask is, are these measures also climate just? So do they address the climate as well? But when we look at the subsidies that are going to be sent or are already sent and shared with citizens and companies and public services, you see that they support gas. They support, in France, for example, they support heating oil. In Poland, they support also coal briquettes, because these are the alternatives that people are trying to develop to face this specific situation. And of course, I mean, we can understand that, because if you don't support that, then people are going to be without any alternative. But clearly, for the climate objectives, we have a problem. So it's really the question of this trade-off between security of supply on the one hand, between affordability on the other hand, and between social and climate impacts on the other hand. So it's a complex question indeed, and even more complex now, because the scope and the depth are probably going to, unfortunately, deteriorate.
Yeah, it's really interesting how they're trying to tackle this problem, how they're going to try to solve it. Seeing also the source, because if we see the as an organic entity, the European Union and their investment that has been made, we see that like the production of energy made by, for example, coal, is a bigger share than the one we made from renewable. The energy produced is more by coal than renewable, and this, yes, is something that is here because of the crisis, of the energy crisis. But we have to remember also what's our future, and that investments now are made for the future. So now we have this crisis that's taking action, but investing that much into sources that should phase out soon maybe is not very clever in the long term.
Yes, I have to agree with you and with Dr. Rachel. Yes, the initiative that we see today, they are tackling the energy poverty issue, like the reopening of coal mining. But climate-wise, yeah, I think the initiative that we should take, or the European countries should take, should also not forget that the Paris Agreement that is made, and we have some goals that are targeted by 2030. So creating initiatives that forget about climate change is creating a little bit of a hypocrisy, contradictory with the agreements and the goals that we've set for a net zero carbon future. Yeah.
Yes, it's a real difficult discussion. I mean, would you like to be in the shoes of policymakers at the moment, deciding on what they had to do? Do they have to secure supply for everyone, even if it's climate unfriendly? Do you have to support citizens? Because what do you see with citizens? You see them on the streets. They are demonstrating. They are not happy with the situation. So it means there is a risk of disturbance of social cohesion in each country, and probably also at EU level, and there's also a risk of political instability. So if you don't act on this aspect as well, it's going to be difficult. So security, climate, affordability, it's always part of this difficult trilemma, and we are really deep in this with the current crisis. So yeah, it's a hard decision. Yeah, you're right.
What should people that are watching this online take away from this conversation?
I would say we all face an unprecedented crisis. I mean, I don't know if you had time to check your electricity bill, maybe. If you had a fixed term contract, you might still be fine if it's a bit longer than 2022. If you have a variable price contract, you may already see some differences, which means probably that because of the type of contract the consumers have, we may see even worse consequences later on, because then the prices are going up. So I would say worse might still come. So we have to be very careful and try to avoid having just a short-term perspective, as you said, but maybe a more longer perspective, as you introduced. What else can I say? We have to think of the future generation. You both mentioned that. In the UK, there is a famous professor called Professor Marmot. He's delivering studies about health. And he sent an alarm sign a few weeks ago saying that if nothing is done, 10 million children in the UK could be facing health issues if the parents can't heat the room properly during the winter. So the future generation is also directly impacted in the short term, but also in the longer term with the climate issues and if we resort to fossil fuel-based resources. So this is, I guess, another thing to keep in mind. Something also that is interesting currently, you said it's an interesting moment. Yes, it is, even though if it's a sad moment. But we see changes in terms of liberalization. And what is the impact of the liberalization currently? It means a new market system, new market designs. But recently the European Commission said we may have to revise the energy market design. What will that bring? Because what we see currently is that we have a lot of suppliers, alternative suppliers, going bankrupt. We have a lot of companies say, we can't afford new clients, we can't take on new clients, it's too expensive for us. And we see even a reverse movement. We see people who used to switch to an alternative, cheaper supplier coming back to the historical big suppliers because they often think, okay, if something bad is happening, it's so big that the state won't let it collapse. So it's safer to be with, the main supplier than with this alternative supplier. So it's bad news somehow for the competitive market we are supposed to have. So what's going to happen with this new market design? This is going to be interesting to follow. And I'm, as you said, sociologist and a bit of political science. And during COVID, it was very interesting to see that governments put in place a lot of disconnection ban, meaning the main aim was to ensure continuous access to electricity and heating for all. Currently, we don't see that much of a discussion, but and maybe it's a question for the debate or a future debate. Wouldn't be this crisis also the opportunity to think in terms of how to guarantee access to basic essential services? It's stated in many European texts, and especially in the EU pillar of social rights. Wouldn't be the time also, when we design these market rules, to think how to integrate that as a dimension for the market design? Question mark, and probably a debate that we can't solve here around this table, but that could be in the minds of the decision makers.
With this price so high, the green companies that are producing electricity with green sources, they are having a boom, let's say, in their profits, and this could be a fuel maybe for competing against the oil giant and the gas giant in the future. When the situation is gonna be more stable, maybe we're gonna see something coming in an interesting way from that side. This is only a bet. Let's say this is one of my thoughts, but I'm not even sure of the outcome of it. But it could be an interesting output for the future.
But it could be a very optimistic view. And Mariam, you're going to tackle this question.
Yes, exactly. And what I can say is, yes, we need to have hope, and there is hope. Maybe the transition is a little bit slow, but this topic, for example, energy poverty, is attracting more attention, and a lot of EU members are making new policies and discussing these matters now. So yes, there is hope, but we need to give it more attention and raise awareness about these topics. Yes.
Yeah, and we need you guys, young people, the future generation of policymakers, and to be aware of this impact. I mean, whatever you decide in terms of supply, there is an impact in terms of demand. Mm-hmm. And how do you combine that so that you make the best adequate answer to this key question?
Yes, many more points to touch upon, but I would say for now we are at the end of the first CIFE Round Table, and I think that it's due to give a warm thank you to Rachel Guyet for her time and energy.
Thank you to you guys for preparing all this and also sharing your inputs on this key topic. I really like to carry on discussing with you on this topic.
Well, thank you very much again, Rachel, for joining us in this first episode of CIFE Roundtable. And we're very happy to have learned so much about energy poverty in the EU and in general in these very hard times due to the energy crisis. And we would also like to thank you, our listeners on Spotify and our viewers on YouTube. And don't forget to follow us on CIFE on Instagram, CIFE Studies,